One of the things the reasons that the platform exists, and we're coming up to almost a year since the platform has started, and one of the primary reasons of that is because we felt collectively that there was such a chilling of free speech and the exchange of ideas in this country that our discussions were being censored, that we were not able to have A, adult conversations, B, to dispute and debate differing points of view, and C, I guess, to be better informed, particularly about issues that were current in the world, if we had a viewpoint that was not considered fashionable or orthodox. And so from, if you like, a conservative orthodoxy in this country, there was a view that came through in New Zealand, say, in the late 50s, 60s, 70s in this country. There was now an orthodoxy, primarily, if you like, of wokedom, if I had to describe it in one word, where a new orthodoxy was in place, and to challenge, to disagree, or in any way to dissent from that orthodoxy was or is inherently wrong, both morally, politically, and probably ethically as well, obviously. Now, somebody who's been observing all this from afar, and I've had on the show before, is one of New Zealand's leading business people. He's been a diplomat, a chief executive, a chairman. He currently fulfills a number of directors' roles throughout New Zealand. And he's also, if you like, the titular head, the taumata of the Otago University Business School, as well as well involved in the community. I think he is the chairperson of the fundraising entity that is raising funds for Waitaki Boys High School and seeking to preserve all those magnificent buildings. He joins us now, Craig Stobo. Welcome to the show, Craig. Nice to have you on.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Michael. How are you?
Very well. Mate, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about Rob Campbell, who was fired from his job as chairperson of Te Whātau Ora. And really, it's sort of, the issues died. He got a bit miffy about it. He said a few things in the public that the reorganisation was going crap. And that was the end of it. But you believe there are long and lingering consequences, yes?
Yes, I do. It's a little bit like Newtonian physics. Every action is an equal and opposite reaction, and we're still working through, I believe, the consequence of this. I wanted to raise some issues with you. What I didn't understand was, of course, Free Speech Friday. So thanks for inviting me to talk.
Quite well. You're most welcome all the time. All right. Now, Craig, what are the ongoing issues that you see from the Campbell issue?
Okay. So a little bit of a background. So Rob Campbell is a senior professional director and business person, well respected in the community, worked on different sides of many fences in New Zealand public life, and a person whose intelligence I respect enormously. When chair of Te Whātau Ora, which is the organisation that leads the day-to-day running of New Zealand's health system, which is delivering functions at local, district, regional and national levels, the health minister sacked him. Now, Te Whātau Ora is a Crown entity, so I just want to make sure everyone understands that that's a public entity, obviously. Rob suggested in a LinkedIn post that the national policy on water was, quote, dog whistling on co-governance. Subsequently, Rob personally apologised to Christopher Luxon, which I think was appropriate given the language. And look, we may agree or disagree with Rob Campbell's views on co-governance, but I was more interested in the circumstances under which directors of Crown entities are able to speak on topics. So I went to the Code of Conduct for directors of Crown entity boards, which was revised in 2020. And there are a number of clauses in there, one of which is titled, "We are politically impartial." And underneath that it says, "We do not make statements or engage in political activity in relation to the function of the Crown entity. When acting in our private capacity, we avoid any political activity that would jeopardise our ability to perform our role or which would erode the public's trust in that entity." So in this occasion, Rob spoke to an issue, co-governance, which had nothing to do with Te Whātau Ora per se. I believe he felt he was justified in talking about that subject. And he thought he, I would imagine, had followed the Code of Conduct. So the question for Kiwis is, was his sacking justified? He recognising that he appropriately apologised to Christopher Luxon. And we may disagree with his views, but should we support his right to talk about topics outside his immediate directorship? And if we don't support that right, well then, who on other Crown Entity boards can ever talk? And I then reflected further on other clauses in that document, which include the words that we act in a politically impartial manner, irrespective of our political interests. And I thought, how naive is that to expect directors of Crown Entity boards to act in a politically impartial manner when we know that we're all political in some respects. And therefore, what is the point in having that particular clause sitting in there when, in fact, it would be better to recognise that we're all political in some way, and to recognise that by way of the interest register, which normally boards will have. They'll have a document that is part of their secretarial, on the secretarial part of their agenda, which reflects the interest of directors and different issues where conflicts might arise. But at this stage, no one puts down their political affiliations, and it would seem to me appropriate for us to debate whether or not directors on Crown Entity boards should disclose their membership of a party or their financial contribution to a party to ensure that the public has a deep understanding of where board members are coming from. But to assert that we should act in a politically impartial manner just seems absurd. So those are the things I wanted to raise with you today, Michael.
No, okay. The thing that automatically comes from that is, so you're asking in one way for greater transparency of individuals who get appointed to boards, and how usually, I see Rob Campbell said he hadn't been paid since October, but usually well remunerated for that as well, so that by the New Zealand taxpayer to serve the New Zealand taxpayer in that commercial capacity. So that's fair enough. And if we're very honest about it, Craig, you don't get elected or nominated, selected for a Crown entity or any such organisation unless you are a friend of the government of the day. It is most unusual for somebody who is got a different political view to be trusted by a particular minister or ministers to get appointed to those boards, yeah?
That's correct. They are a government through a process. They are appointed ultimately by the shareholder or the minister of that particular entity. You're absolutely right.
So in actual fact, not just objective but subjective criteria are applied by the minister because they might know them personally or professionally, but more likely, when you look at appointments, particularly to government boards and agencies, they know them politically. In other words, they believe they can trust them because they share a similar political lineage and outlook, yeah?
Correct, that's exactly right.
Which is exactly why you're saying, so if you are a member of the Labour Party, Rob Campbell, that you should have that in your declaration of interest when you get appointed to that job. Okay, so that's the first thing. The concept, though, of neutrality, that concept is as old as the civil service, I guess. And so I imagine that's where the lessons come from, Craig, that if I am working for the government, providing advice, policy, I'm meant to be impartial, whether I'm in local government and central government, so therefore I'm not meant to have a political bias obvious. I'm assuming that quite good concept, if you believe in the neutral public sector, is being extended to these other quasi-public sector, yeah?
Yes. I think that raises an interesting issue. I guess I hate that word interesting. It raises the issue around why bother having, well, two angles, why bother having the words required to act in a politically impartial manner in there, or a broader issue is, do these directors serve the state or the public? And that's a very old discussion in the public service. And you ultimately get to a question around, are the people that you appoint around the table to a board, do they have a diversity of views that enable the board to act in a better way than if people are all come from a very similar perspective? And diversity is important for the ability of the board to be able to deliver outcomes that are based on a broader range of perspectives than one or two similar perspectives, which in some political language people call groupthink. So that's the challenge. But it seems to me naive to expect people to be politically impartial in the code of conduct when either they're appointed by the minister for various reasons, as you suggest, political alignment, or they are, have a particular viewpoint which is not disclosed to the board or the public, but which influences their decision making.
Well, and that's interesting too, because I'm a conservative, as you'll be aware, and many of our listeners are as well. But if there's one, perhaps, worldview that we share at the moment, it is that the New Zealand public sector is no longer that haven of neutrality, that there are public policy and senior government officials who have, if you like, a clear political agenda, who are unelected and who represent that, and not just the policy advice that they provide to ministers, but the way in which they interpret government decisions at an operational level. Now, do you share that concern, or is that just us conservatives being a bit phobic?
No, I share that concern, and that goes to that diversity point. And the appointment process for these Crown entities, as there are issues with other parts of the Crown public service boards. And when you progress along that line of thinking, it becomes difficult to recruit good quality, independent thinking directors who genuinely have an interest in improving the outcomes for that particular entity. It's discouraging. It's discouraging those people to apply for those roles. And we have a diminishing role of directors available, willing and able to serve on those organisations when there's a very clear political imperative. And so we get diminished outcomes, in my view.
Okay, so you're looking for that diversity of political views and social views across the spectrum to be on boards because you think you'll get a much more balanced representation of and that's fair enough. The second thing, though, that you've raised has really intrigued me for a long, long time. The private lives of people and whether or not they are entitled to one, because the perception is that if you do something in your private life that offends somebody somewhere, you also can't serve in these government roles. Can I give you an example with Rob Campbell? If Rob Campbell had a marriage breakdown that got messy and was on the front page, the potential is that he would be removed from that position not because of anything he'd done wrong, but because he was bringing, if you like, a reputational risk to the organisation that he was working for. Yeah?
Yeah, so the key word that I heard in that series of words was the word offence. And we are in a problematic situation, aren't we, in this country, if we are reluctant to, quote-unquote, offend people because of people's perspectives and views. And that just gives to a monochromatic outcome where no one offends anybody, but you don't get any conflict that's clearly obvious with which to move to resolution. The increasing gradations from offending to prejudice to, for example, illegal discrimination is a different matter. But offending people, it seems to me we head to a very difficult position where we cannot resolve conflict because no one wants to offend other people, which I think is a poor outcome for our society.
Well, let me give you an example, though, close to home. And if I can just use a hypothetical with you, Craig. You're taumata of the Otago University Business School. Now, it seems to me that universities in New Zealand over the last 20 or 30 years have become not necessarily promoters of freedom of speech, the liberal values that you and I hope to have imbued in us when we were undergraduates, but that they have become exactly what you are suggesting, the arbiters of that monochromatic outcome. If you were to go to, let's just say, the Posey Parker sign and be seen as supportive of a worldview that men are men and women are women, and that trans men do not enjoy all the rights of women, and let's just say that was your view. I'm not suggesting it is, but let's just say that was your view. Could you be held accountable for your particular position because of a private and personal stance that you'd personally taken?
Well, a little bit depends on the publicity you seek around that. A private attendance in a public space, I'm not sure that you would be held accountable. That depends how public you want to make yourself on those issues.
See, I'm betting you would be sacked, Craig. I'm betting that if you were that person and there were sundry Otago University people who recognised you and made a big fuss about the fact that the taumata of the Otago University Business School was taking a particularly unpopular view on what is, part of our unfortunate culture wars at the moment, that you'd be hounded for your role in a way which, for example, Otago University law professor Mark Hennigan was hounded from his.
Yes, well, I think you're absolutely right. And the most recent example is a academic at AUT who has posted online through LinkedIn his concerns about, and I think you've interviewed him on the show before, his concerns about being able to talk inside academic circles. And he's confined to a particular lane or a particular space within a tight boundary, and he feels that he no longer loves, quote unquote, his university because of that diminished ability to debate topics that need to be debated. So I think you're right.
Okay. Thank you for highlighting this, Craig, but what's the solution? I mean, you and I are having this chat. I've known you for a long time. You are not an illiberal, insensitive person. Far from it. You have been a captain of New Zealand's commercial sector for a long, long time, serving in a number of illustrious causes, and anybody's just got to Google you to work it out. You've done fine. But can I ask, what's the next step? At what point do people start pushing back against this particular agenda and saying no? And then how do they do that?
Well, the suggestion I've put on the table to you is to recognise the naivety of expecting directors to act in a politically impartial manner, irrespective of our political interests. I just think that's naive and unacceptable. Why don't we recognise that people do have political views and just get them into an interest register? Everyone knows where we're coming from for memberships of Crown entities, and then we can understand perhaps the direction of those entities, driven by the minister or not, and debate the outcomes that derive from the governors on those boards. I just think if we had more transparency, we get better discussion, better debate, and over time, better outcomes. That's what I'm putting on the table. That's a revision of that code of conduct.
Yeah. No, I think that sounds very sane. Now, the question is, will any of the other political parties, we're heading into an election in 5.5 months' time, Craig, do you think by that?
It's been broached only the last, week or so as a subject matter. I know that the Institute of Directors is debating these sorts of issues, but it goes to the heart of the question around how our public service is structured and how the advice is provided and how policy is executed by entities owned by the Crown. And that's a bigger question around the efficacy of our public service and the organisations that serve our public. So this is one part of a bigger issue, which is the role of public servants, their ability to deliver on behalf of the public. So, you do one step at a time, you raise the issue, you come at it from a very different angle, you get people talking about it, and then sanity kicks in and says, well, let's move away from nonsense of something that actually is pragmatic, which is what Kiwis want.
And finally, and I'll just let you go, and I'm going to switch you just because I've suddenly remembered. You, as I recall, now I could be wrong, you would tell me, of course you'll tell me, you headed up for the government a review of some aspect of our taxation system a wee while ago. Have I got that right?
Yes, correct.
What was that report?
So in 2004, the Minister of Finance, the then Minister of Finance, Michael Cullen, asked me to work on building a consensus towards a fairer taxation of investment income, which is now known as the portfolio, the PI regime, portfolio investment tax regime, which was required to be able to enact KiwiSaver in 2007. So I worked between organisations basically saying that our previous regime of different tax rates for unit trusts, for group investment funds, for super schemes, all at different tax rates, there were pockets of investment that was inappropriate given the tax position of the people using those systems, those products. So we went around saying we can't stay where we are, we have to move forward. You might be worried about jumping over the crevasse, but behind you is a huge avalanche. We have to move. So I built a consensus towards change, worked with Treasury and IRD, and built the PI regime, which supports KiwiSaver, which I'm proud to say has been untouched since that was put in place. The second tax work I did was for John Key on the export of financial services, which is still rolling out as an opportunity for fund administrators to work on behalf of clients around the world who are using global financial products. So, yeah, that work was I'm very proud of that piece of work with both Treasury and IRD officials. It was a great example of collaboration. So you're absolutely right. I did get involved in tax.
Well, so that's why I'm good. That's why I'm leading into this question. Capital gains tax. The IRD put out their bit from the Minister David Parker. They looked at the 300-odd richest, they said, individuals in New Zealand and surmised that they were not equitably contributing to the fabric of this country. The capital gains tax has been suggested as the obvious and clear solution. Other countries have it. Craig, how far are we away? And I'm not asking for your view necessarily, but practically, how far are we away from a capital gains tax being applied in this country?
Well, I guess the first starting point is we already have a capital gains tax that's we're taxed on realised gains where we decide to invest in something with the intention of making a profit, for example. And so we already have a form of capital gains tax. It has bright line tests now, of course. So let's just recognise that we do have a form. It's not as sophisticated or as regulated as capital gains taxes around the rest of the world. I thought you had a great interview with Robin Oliver, who was GP of IRD a while ago. A lot of respect for him. I think the quote that he gave you was that we have one of the best tax systems in the world because it's simple, easy to understand, not litigious, for example. In terms of how far away we are, I think the Prime Minister's decision on hosing that piece of work down pretty quickly tells you where Cabinet is at and where the politics are at. And I think the survey itself, as Robin pointed out, had a number of inconsistencies which undermines the integrity of that report. And I was actually frankly disappointed there were only 400 people in that position. We really want 4,000 people who are in that category of people who are building things and investing in things in this country. So actually the surprising thing for me was a small number of people in the survey. We need a much bigger sample size.
Craig, thank you so much for your insight. It's appreciated. Just to explain to people, Craig, we hope to be a regular contributor to our show. His insights, particularly commercial, but ethical and political as well. He's got a welter of knowledge, and having that of us is a big deal. Craig, thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. Have a good day.
Okay, you too, mate. Have a good weekend. All right, Craig Stobo.